pulled up to the address scribbled on the crumpled piece of paper and looked around hesitantly. The house was old and decrepit, with peeling paint and overgrown weeds in the yard. Strange symbols were etched into the wooden doorframe. This didn't seem like the meeting place for a tourist group. A gruff voice called out from the gloom of the porch. "You here for the tour?" I nodded uncertainly as a large man emerged. He had a bushy beard and piercing eyes that seemed to stare right through me. In one meaty hand he held an antique lantern, in the other a heavy ring of keys. "Well, don't just stand there gawking, come on in." He turned and went inside without another word. I got out of the car, took a deep breath, and followed him into the house. The inside was just as dilapidated as the outside. Dust and cobwebs covered every surface. The air smelled stale and oppressive. My guide lit a few more lanterns, illuminating an interior cluttered with strange artifacts and ominous paintings. He regarded me seriously. "My name's Angus. I'll be taking you to meet the others shortly, but first I need to lay down some ground rules. You must do exactly as I say at all times, no matter how strange it may seem. Your survival depends on it." I swallowed hard. This was definitely not what I had expected. Angus continued, "You are to speak only when permitted. Do not touch anything without permission. And most importantly, once we begin the ritual, you must not under any circumstances open your eyes. The consequences of disobeying are unpleasant." "Ritual?" I stammered. "Wait a minute, I think there's been some kind of mistake. I just signed up for a tour of historical landmarks, not anything occult." Angus silenced me with a glare. "Enough. The tour has already begun. There is no turning back now." He turned and unlocked a door leading to a spiral staircase. "Come, it is time." Though my instincts screamed at me to run, morbid curiosity compelled me forward. I followed Angus down into complete darkness. The temperature dropped sharply with each step. At the bottom was a heavy stone door covered in disturbing carvings. Strange chanting echoed from within. Angus produced an ornate dagger and handed it to me. "For your protection," he rasped. Before I could object, he pulled open the door. Icy wind lashed my face. The chanting grew louder. "Enter and keep your eyes shut," Angus commanded. "The ceremony is about to begin." Against my better judgment, I complied. Blindly, I stumbled forward into a scene of madness. The chanting voices surrounded me, speaking words in a foul language I could not comprehend. Strange smells assaulted my nostrils. Bony hands grasped at my clothes. I shuddered in terror but dared not open my eyes. Suddenly the chant ceased. A deathly silence fell over the room. Then a raspy voice spoke. "You may open your eyes, initiate, and bear witness to the glory of the old ones." I slowly cracked one eyelid. My blood turned to ice in my veins. Before me towered a monstrous being with scaly skin and eyes of fire. It held a bloody heart in one clawed hand. Its mere presence exuded power and malevolence beyond comprehension. Mad cackling erupted all around. I opened my other eye and looked down to see myself surrounded by a circle of robed figures. Their hands were stained red, and their faces concealed by hoods. But there was no mistaking the insanity in their eyes. I gripped the dagger, my only defense against the nightmare before me. The demonic creature spoke again in a sibilant whisper that cut to my very soul. "You have been chosen as a sacrifice to the old ones. Do not struggle. Your terror shall sweeten your soul to their taste." The robed figures began chanting once more. The monster held the heart above its head in offering. I knew then that I was doomed. These maniacs were going to slaughter me as part of some unholy ritual. I backed up against the stone wall, dagger held out in shaking hands. The creature noticed my movement and let out an ear-splitting shriek of rage. It stomped toward me, bloody claws outstretched. The robed figures closed in, daggers glinting in the firelight. This was it. I was going to die at the hands of mad cultists in an eldritch ceremony to their vile god. I braced myself for the end when suddenly a shout rang out. "That's it! Cut! Cut!" The scene froze. The robed figures lowered their daggers. The shouting had come from Angus, who now barged into the circle looking furious. "How many times do I have to go over this?" He jabbed a finger at the demonic creature. "Cthulhu, your performance is lackluster. Put some more oomph into it. You're an immortal cosmic entity, not a community theater understudy." He rounded on the robed figures. And all of you, I want more excitement in the chanting. We talked about vocal dynamics, remember your breathing. And for evil's sake, stop bumping into each other. Finally, he turned to me. Not bad for your first day on set, but try to look more terrified. The audience needs to feel that mortal dread. I just stared, mouth agape. Wait, what is going on? Angus sighed. Production value, my boy. We're shooting the pilot episode of our new YouTube series, Cult of Cthulhu. I'm the director. This is all special effects and costumes. He motioned around the set. I now noticed hidden cameras amongst the props. The daggers had retractable blades, and Cthulhu was peeling off a thick layer of latex from his face. We're making the next big viral horror series, Angus continued. Cult rituals, human sacrifice, cosmic terrors. It's going to be amazing. That is, if we can get the performances right. He scowled at the actors, who looked away sheepishly. My shock was giving way to indignation. You mean this was all fake? You made me think I was going to be killed. Method acting, Angus replied. We needed genuine reactions. Don't worry, you were never in any real danger. He put a burly hand on my shoulder. So what do you say? Want to sign on for the full season? I promise the production value only gets better from here. We've got some amazing practical effects lined up. I shoved his hand away angrily. No thanks. I've had enough of your warped idea of entertainment. I stomped off towards the exit. Behind me, I heard Angus calling desperately. Come on, it will be a hit series. We'll make you a star. But I ignored him. I had experienced enough horror for one lifetime. From now on, I was sticking to nice, safe historical tours. The wind howled outside the isolated farmhouse, scattering leaves and debris. Inside, the fire crackled as Abigail set a kettle on the stove. Some tea will warm us right up, she said cheerily to her husband Caleb. He grunted in reply, not looking up from the paper he was reading. Abigail sighed. Her husband had been distant and preoccupied all evening. She knew he was worried about the harvest, with unseasonably cold weather on the way, but wished he would talk to her. As she prepared the tea, the back door suddenly blew open with a bang that made her jump. Caleb leaped from his chair, cursing under his breath as he went to close it. Blasted latch needs fixing again, he muttered. After securing the door, he returned to his paper without another word. Abigail brought him his tea, then settled down to sew. As she worked, a feeling of unease crept over her. She had the strangest sense of being watched by unseen eyes. Glancing around nervously, she saw nothing amiss, yet could not shake the feeling. Did you hear that? She asked Caleb after a loud thump upstairs. Hear what? He grumbled without looking up. I'm sure I heard something. Maybe you should check. Caleb threw down his paper in annoyance. Woman, the only thing up there is your imagination. Stop bothering me with foolishness. Abigail bit her lip. She knew she hadn't imagined the noise. But Caleb was clearly not in the mood to investigate. After they retired to bed, Abigail lay awake listening to the settling of the old house. Through the window, the full moon illuminated the swaying treetops. A profound sense of dread filled her, though she knew not why. Unable to get comfortable, Abigail left Caleb snoring loudly and went downstairs for warm milk. As she entered the kitchen, she froze. The back door was wide open, creaking on its hinges. The wind moaned outside like a mournful spirit. Abigail stood petrified. Someone or something had come inside while they slept. Caleb needed to know. She turned and ran smack into a dark figure standing right behind her. Stifling a scream, she stumbled backwards. As her eyes adjusted, she recognized the grim face of Mr. Renshaw, an elderly neighbor. Relief washed over her. Mr. Renshaw, you gave me a fright. What are you doing here so late? The old man just stared at her silently. His clothes were muddy and torn, his white hair wild. Abigail glanced uneasily at the open door. Please, sir, come in by the fire where it's warm. I'll prepare you some tea and supper. Still, he did not move or speak. A strange look came into his eyes that Abigail did not like one bit. She noticed his hands curling into claws by his side. Mr. Renshaw? She asked nervously. Are you quite all right? A low growl was his only response. Abigail's heart pounded as the horrible truth dawned on her. This was not their neighbor standing before her. It was something far more sinister wearing his face. Gasping in terror, Abigail turned to flee up the stairs, but the thing was upon her in an instant, gnarled hands grasping her nightgown. She screamed as a fetid stench overwhelmed her senses. All at once, Caleb was there, having grabbed his shotgun from their room. He swung the heavy stock and knocked the creature away from Abigail. Leveling the barrels at it, Caleb fired point blank. The blast nearly deafened Abigail in the confined space. When the smoke cleared, she saw the creature writhing on the floor, black ichor oozing from its wounds. But to her dismay, it began rising again, hatred burning in its eyes. Caleb frantically reloaded as the abomination came at him. Just before it struck, another shot rang out from the open doorway. The creature let loose an unearthly howl and collapsed to the floor. Abigail looked up to see an elderly woman silhouetted in the doorway. Her lined face was grim, and she held an antique flintlock pistol. Abigail recognized their neighbor, Miss Renshaw, the real Miss Renshaw. The old woman kept her pistol trained on the unmoving creature as she stepped inside. Caleb hurried over and slammed the door shut. Together they watched the thing on the floor warily, but it did not rise again. Miss Renshaw sighed wearily. I warned Arthur not to trifle in those infernal texts, but he never did have the sense God gave a goat. She gestured disdainfully at the creature. I suppose he thought he'd gain power over life and death. Well, he has his answer now. Abigail shuddered. Is that Mr. Renshaw? It was, my dear, but it hasn't been my Arthur for some time now. His curiosity awoke something, and it took him. This horror is all that's left. Caleb shook his head in disbelief. How could you know this? Why didn't you warn us? Miss Renshaw gave him a piercing look. And be branded an old fool? I kept silent to protect myself, but when I saw the fiend had come here, I knew I must act. She knelt down and retrieved a strange medallion from around the creature's neck. This bears the mark of the ghoul. It must be purified. Soon only a blackened mark on the floor remained. Caleb and Abigail stared, too overwhelmed for words. Miss Renshaw pocketed the purified amulet. This is but one battle in an ancient war. Will you stand with me to face the coming darkness? Or shall I continue alone? Caleb and Abigail regarded each other. Abigail took her husband's hand and squeezed it meaningfully. For the first time that evening, Caleb gave her a smile. He turned back to Miss Renshaw. Tell us what must be done. The old woman nodded approvingly. Outside, the wind continued to howl as the secret war against the forces of darkness began anew. I found the old typewriter at a yard sale when I was 12 years old. It was love at first sight. The clickety-clack of the keys, the ding of the carriage return, the crisp imprint of ink on paper. I was enthralled. My parents just saw an outdated piece of junk, but to me it was magical. I set up the typewriter on my desk and spent hours plinking away, writing stories and poems to my heart's content. The words seemed to flow directly from my imagination through my fingertips onto the page. It was the most wonderful feeling in the world. That is, until the nightmares started. They began innocuously enough. I would dream I was sitting at my desk typing away, lost in creative flow, when a shadow would fall over me. I'd look up to see a spectral figure standing beside me, observing as I worked. The apparition was vaguely human-shaped, but with no distinguishable features. Just a shadowy, swirling darkness in a vaguely humanoid form. The dream always ended the same way. I would wake up in a panic just as the shadowy figure reached toward me. I'd sit bolt upright in bed, heart racing, drenched in a cold sweat. As the nights went on, the dreams progressed. The dark figure moved closer each time, and I could feel its presence like a weight on my chest. Desperately, I would try to scream or move, but was paralyzed. All I could do was tap away at the typewriter as the shadow enveloped me. I became terrified to sleep at night. Exhausted as I was, I fought slumber with all my might to stave off the nightly horrific visions. But eventually I could resist no more and would collapse into a fitful, haunted sleep, and the figure crept ever nearer. My parents noticed the toll the nightmares took on me. Dark circles formed under my eyes, and I drifted through days in a fog. They suggested I stop using the typewriter so much, thinking it overstimulated my imagination before bed. I refused. I loved my typewriter. It was the medium for the stories I was born to tell. No, I decided, I must find a way to conquer my night terrors. That's when I hatched a desperate plan. I would confront the shadowy apparition and face my fears. I waited until my next nightmare began. This time, when the dark figure appeared beside me, I spun to face it before it could reach for me. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice trembling. To my shock, the apparition spoke in a raspy whisper. "Let me tell you a story." Ghostly tendrils enveloped me, and I slipped into darkness. Images flashed through my mind faster than I could comprehend. I saw an ancient-looking office, the ghostly figure hunched over a typewriter centuries old. I witnessed terrifying scenes: murder, ritual, sacrifice. Things no child should see. I realized the figure itself had no shape or form. It was the stories it told, the words it manifested, and those words had power, dark power. They could manipulate reality, warp minds, control fates. With mounting horror, I understood this thing had been trying for decades to find a human conduit into our world, and I had opened the door. I woke screaming, drenched not just in sweat but blood from where I had clawed at my arms in sheer terror. My mother rushed in to comfort me. As she embraced me, I stared at my precious typewriter sitting innocently on the desk. The next morning, I told my parents we had to get rid of the typewriter. Something evil inhabited it, I explained. Something I had unwittingly let loose into our world. They didn't understand, but to placate me, hauled the cursed device away that very day. I thought that was the end of my nightmare. I was wrong. That first night after the typewriter's removal brought no respite. As I slept, the dark figure returned in my dreams, enraged at being cast aside. It had gained just enough power from me to keep a tenuous hold on this reality. In a rasping whisper, it cursed me. It had told me a story, one that must be finished. Should I leave its tale unfinished, there would be consequences. I refused. I would not be its pawn. But the shadowy creature was patient. It tormented my dreams and dogged my waking thoughts, slowly chipping away at my resolve. Over weeks and months, it wore down my defenses, until one day I yielded. I could endure no more. I went to my father and begged him. I must have the typewriter back. Surely he thought me mad, but the desperation in my eyes swayed him. Thus the infernal device was returned. I set it up once more on the desk in my room. That night the creature visited me again. As it hovered over my shoulder, I placed my fingers to the keys. A story took shape in my mind. A story not of my making, but one forced upon me. I began to type. The words came haltingly at first, but soon began to flow through me. A tale more horrifying than anything I could have conceived. I was powerless to stop it. The story possessed me completely. Night after night, I sat transcribing the gruesome visions the phantom fed into my mind. I rarely left my desk anymore, eating and sleeping little. I was but a vessel through which its sinister narrative could reach the physical plane. My parents pleaded with me to stop, but I could not make them understand. I had to keep typing. Should I stop halfway, untold calamity would be unleashed. In truth, part of me enjoyed being the conduit for this epic tale, but the sane portion of my mind screamed for it to end. It finally did one blood-red dawn. As I typed the final paragraph, senses reeling from the mind-shattering climax, I watched the words etch themselves on the page as if guided by an unseen hand. With the final period, a profound silence filled the room. It was finished. The creature had told its story through me, poisoning my dreams and leeching away my vitality. Now, finally, I was free of its cursed power. I stumbled from my desk, manic laughter escaping my lips. I was myself again. The shadowy presence had departed this world, banished back to the realm of nightmares where it belonged, or so I believed. But as I turned to look upon that cursed contraption which had been my tormentor, I froze. There, imprinted on the paper, was one more sentence, one I had not typed. It read simply, "The end?" I scream in primal terror, all hope of freedom turning to bitter ashes in my mouth. The mad cackling in my mind I realize is not my own. I fall to my knees, weeping and tearing at my hair. It seems the story is not over after all. The next chapter is about to begin. The end.